Welcome back to the Sales Cadence Podcast. This is the podcast for everyone in sales, because everyone is in sales. We're all selling something. My name is Matt Sykes. I'm your host. I'm the author of the book Sales Glue and Converted. And if, like me, you're as passionate about helping people make truly epic buying decisions so that more people buy what you sell, great news. You're in the right place. Folks, welcome back to the Sales Cadence Podcast. Delighted that you decided to spend some time with me today. Whatever it is that you're doing, I hope you're having a fantastic day. So today's episode, slightly different in terms of it's not sales specific. I like to think that over the 4 or 5 years we've been doing this podcast, pretty much because the name's on the tin, it's the Sales Cadence Podcast. Therefore, there has to be some tangible link to the world of selling. But on occasions, I do dip outside of that sphere and invite guests on who I believe have got some real value to bring to you, the listener. And so if I think back to one specific one, back in the middle of 2023, we had Ian Tucker, brilliant guy, fantastic. He's a wellness coach. He came onto the podcast to help me understand a little bit more about mindfulness and how to deal with resilience and all of those really valuable and important things, I guess, that our period in lockdown brought to our attention. And so every now and again, I'll pop outside of the world of sales. I would say there's always a link. Ian, previous to being involved in wellness and meditation and Reiki and all those great things, was in sales himself. So I always like to make some kind of link to the world of sales with every guest or every episode I bring to you. And today is no different. Today is really telling the story of what happened to me last month. I headed up to Scotland with a really good friend of mine, a guy called Alan Henry. Alan is, first of all, a super guy. He works in the world of sales. He's a commercial director for an organization called ESB Broadcast. They're specialists in the world of broadcast media. So if you're in that world of TV and film, and you are responsible for buying cameras or lenses or outside broadcast vehicles, the kind of things that you see outside football grounds on match day, those big trucks, that's Alan's world. So Alan is a commercial sales director by day job. And at the weekends, he's a golfer. And so back in the day when I first met Alan some 15 years ago, we brought together by our kids going to the same primary school. We've been friends ever since. Alan used to be a professional golfer. And so he's kept that game going all of those 15 years that we've been together. We played a lot of golf together. And as I'm about to tell you on this episode, what happened last month is Alan decided to come out of retirement, shall we say. And he said to me, Matt, I want to go and try and qualify for the Seniors British Open, which was taking place last month up in Carnoustie in Scotland. And I thought, yeah, I'm all over that. I'm all over any experience which gets me out of my comfort zone. I love golf anyway. I'm a bit of a bang average golfer, but I've caddied for Alan before, and I know what an exceptional golfer he is. And I think he's got a chance. And so we decided to head up to Scotland, to Dundee is where we placed ourselves, about 10, 15 minutes away from the golf course where the qualification round was taking place, in a place called Monteith. Fabulous course, by the way, guys. Any of you find yourself in Scotland and you are golfers, wow. So we headed up to Dundee and we spent 4 or 5 days up there. And really this podcast is about explaining to you a little bit about what happened that week. But because of the link of sales, I want to bring to you what I believe are 8 fantastic qualities that I found during that week. Now, let me just put a little bit more meat on the bones for you. When I say I found them, my role that week was to be Alan's caddie. So I'm carrying the golf bag. And I found over the period of that week that there are some things that you need to do to be a really exceptional golf caddy, to allow your golfer to perform at his best, to allow the round of golf to go hitch-free. And every time one of these sort of groundbreaking light bulb moments went off, I thought, you know what, that's really applicable to the world of sales. And so this episode is bringing to you those things that I found that week. And in fact, there are 8 of them. And so let me take you through each of those 8 things one at a time. Before I get there, let me just share, we jump in a car. We live in the south of the UK. Obviously, Scotland is some distance away. It's a 8-hour drive. We head up there. We get up there on a Thursday evening. And so Friday, Saturday, Sunday, we're playing golf on the course. I'm caddying, Al's playing. Just so you're aware, if you're not, to try and qualify for the British Open, you have to be a significantly good golfer. And the majority of the field are professional golfers. They do it for a living. They go all around the world playing various golf competitions to try and win prize money. And what Alan's doing as an amateur is putting himself in that high stress, high pressure world of professional sport and trying to match up to those guys that do it for a living. And here's Alan, who was a pro probably 20 years ago, kept the game going as an amateur, just trying to put himself in that place. So kudos to him for doing that. So we get up to Scotland and we play 3 rounds of golf, and then qualification is on the Monday. And I'll take you through how that round of golf went as we go. Number one, what I established was, as a golf caddy for Alan, is the primary role, and here's the first takeaway, folks, the primary role is to serve others. The basic fundamental job of being a caddy, of course, is to carry the golf bag, but there is so much more to it. But the primary role is to serve and carry the bag, and you have to be comfortable. And I found this out quite quickly. Got no problem being outside of the spotlight when it comes to golf, because I know as a bang average golfer, I don't have the right to be playing golf on that particular day. So happy to make way and concede the spotlight to the star, who was Al, but you have to be comfortable allowing that to happen, because there is a far greater, there's a bigger picture at stake here. The more you're out of the spotlight, the more he's in it, the more you can effectively do all of the things that are going on around the periphery to allow him to maintain his position and be his best in the spotlight. And it reminded me so much of the world of sales, because in sales, effectively, our role, certainly at the initial stages, and you could argue throughout the sales process, is to serve the prospect or to serve the customer. That's our job. Our job is to help them diagnose and effectively solve whatever problem they bring to us, or if they're looking to achieve something, help them understand why achieving those things is going to be good for them. And so all of that happens as a consequence of us serving up really great questions and then providing them with the ability to help them either answer it themselves or give them information so that they can answer it themselves. And so effectively the primary role, therefore, is servitude. It's their timeline, it's their buying criteria. We've just got to make sure that we are of some relevance and be of some form of service. Now, there are 2 words that come to mind when I talk about being of servitude to others or serving others. And some of them sometimes get a little bit of bad press from some of the knockers on LinkedIn, but I'm going to share those 2 words with you. The first word is empathy. It is an overused word, but it is so fundamentally critical to the world of sales. It is in my opinion, it is the most important sales skill there is. You need to understand others before allowing yourself to impose your understanding on them. Seek first to understand before being understood would be the words of Stephen Covey. 7 Habits of Highly Effective People was his best-selling book. And it's so fundamentally true when it comes to sales. We have to understand and accept that the person, call them the prospect, has an opinion, and that we need to allow them to share their opinion with us first before we help them understand how we might be able to help them. It can't be the other way around, because if it is, having tried that experiment a long time ago when I was earlier in sales, that doesn't tend to work very well. So the first one I would ask just to consider is empathy. And, as we go through this episode, ask yourself the question, is empathy high up on your list of skills? Do you put the other person first? And if you don't, maybe you can start to understand a little bit about how you might be able to be a little bit better at that. Rather than forcing your message onto them, try and understand what it's like to be sat in the other person's shoes, walk in their shoes before you tap dance in your own, would be my advice. And then the second word that comes to mind is curiosity. And again, gets a little bit of bad press, maybe it's overused, but it goes hand in hand with empathy, because if you are willing to understand the other person, then to go more than one question deep, or peel back the layers of the onion, as the phrase goes, is you've got to be curious. You've got to be curious to understand why they've got this problem and what's been going on. So curiosity is also a very valuable skill that will serve you well. So look, number one, first sort of valuable lesson, and to some extent, if you like, skill that I learned from caddying for Alan as he tried to qualify on that Monday at Montefieth up in Scotland to find a spot on the Thursday first tee at the British Seniors Open at Carnoustie, was to accept the fact that the primary role is to serve the other person. Number 2, you have got to be prepared. Preparation is your friend. So if I think about a really great example from the 2001 British Open, Ian Woosnam, his caddy was a guy called Miles Byrne, And the guys had been practicing as you do before you tee off. And so they're on the driving range and they're practicing with two different drivers. They get to the first tee and the off they go. And when they get to the second tee, which is a par 5, the caddy suddenly realises he's forgotten to take the second driver out of the bag. And so now Woosy's got not just all of his clubs, he's also got two drivers. Now the problem with that, of course, is there is a rule in golf where you're only allowed 14 clubs. And here's Woozy standing on the second tee in the first round of the British Open in 2001 with 15 clubs. And that, folks, is a 2-shot penalty. And if you ever get the chance to go onto YouTube and have a look, you'll see Woozy pulling the driver out of his bag and throwing it on the floor and lambasting his caddy Miles Byrne. You only had one job to do. And the consequences of that event were quite significant in so much as whilst it was day one of a 4-day round of golf, because the Open is over 4 rounds of golf, Thursday through to Sunday. Although Woozy didn't win the Open, if you added back in those 2 shots to where he did finish, he would have won an extra £200,000 in prize money. So you could argue that one mistake of not being prepared cost him 200 grand. His caddy got sacked about a month later, not specifically because of that incident, but I suspect because there were a number of other incidents that had led up to the fact that it was time for Woozy to change his caddy. So you can start to see how a lack of preparation kind of doesn't work very well. And so for me on the golf course, I had to think ahead. I had to always be prepared. What is the weather going to do? What is the wind doing? The wind plays a big part in golf. Have we got enough water and snacks in the golf bag? Because at certain periods in the time, Al wants to keep himself hydrated. He might get low on energy and he needs a bit of a pick-me-up. Have we got the yardage book? Do I know what the yardages are? What about club selection? You can start to see all of these things start to come into play. And a bit like I said at the start of the podcast, it's a little bit more to being a caddy than just carrying a golf bag. And so I often say to people who don't play the game, don't, because it's the hardest game in the world. It really is the most difficult game there is, as far as I'm concerned. And a lack of preparation on the golf course or before you play actually makes a really difficult game that much harder. So when we think about that second point or that value of you've got to be prepared to be a good caddy, if I bring that into sales, then we've got to be prepared when we go into sales conversations. It's an obvious statement to make, and most of you will already be doing a fair amount of due diligence, I'm sure. You'll be doing some LinkedIn social engineering, perhaps. Let's just say, for argument's sake, someone's dropped into your calendar and they want to have a first-time call. You've never met them before. You're going to go and do some due diligence. You're going to go and check them out on LinkedIn. Who is this person? What's their role? You're going to try and work out something about their organization. You're probably going to pop over to company's house. Have they got any money? You might even decide to try and work out, well, what is their personality type? Because there's so much you can learn from somebody's LinkedIn profile to give you real clues around whether this person is an introvert or an extrovert, whether they are an influencer or a decision maker based on what their role is. And of course, there are other people in that organization. As an experienced salesperson, that at some point, if this conversation goes well, it will lead to another. And the next conversation is probably going to be about introducing some of those people in that consensus team, that decision-making team, that are going to have an input in which direction the conversation is going to go in. And so you can do some due diligence into who those people are in advance. And one of the things I like to try and do with my clients is help them on that due diligence journey by using a pre-call plan. And now, if you already got a pre-call plan, great. If you already just make a note of 2 or 3 things, who are they, what do they do, look at the website, have they got cash, terrific. If you want to go deeper, I have a very intensive pre-call plan that I use with my clients, and I'm happy to share that with you. Just reach out to me on LinkedIn, send me a direct message, and I'll send that to you with my absolute pleasure. But there are a number of things on that pre-call plan that go sort of next level deep. And one of those things would be, how many touch points have I already had with this prospect? Because, we all know that there are a number of engagement points that somebody's going to have before they decide they've learned enough about you and they've created enough trust or reduced the amount of sales suspicion they have because they've consumed some content. So they've read something, they've watched you perhaps on YouTube, they've read some of your posts on LinkedIn, they've listened to a podcast like this, and they've satisfied themselves that actually you're not a threat. You do look like the sort of person that might be able to help them, and therefore I'm going to reach out and have a conversation. And the guiding rule is somewhere between 8 to 12 of those things need to have happened And so, key point, just make sure you've got those assets. They're called products for prospects. But on your pre-call plan, just make a note of what touch point do you think you're at. If you're already into a sales conversation, and this is like meeting number 2 perhaps, then probably you're up to 8, 9, even 10 touch points. If it's the first engagement, you might only be at 1 or 2. And if you are only at 1 or 2, then that obviously is going to have some influence over the direction of travel you're going to take on this first call. You're not going to go steaming in. You're going to understand the fact that at the moment, because they've only consumed a little bit of whatever it is that you do, that you're going to have to help them with a few more touch points before you get into the meat and potatoes of having a proper sales discussion. So feel free to reach out on LinkedIn and DM me, and I'll send you that pre-call plan. But obviously, from a sales perspective, being prepared really is the behavior of a sales professional. And I would argue that anybody that's not preparing in advance effectively is winging it. And anybody that wings it for a living is probably not going to be regarded as a professional. So point number 2 is you've got to be prepared. Point number 3, what I learned from carrying Al's bag on that Monday qualification round up in Scotland is you've got to be timely. If you're a caddie, you have got to keep an eye on the clock. And so, one of the very obvious things is you've got to be on time to hit your first tee shot. So you've got to be on the first tee a good 5 minutes before your tee time. If you don't, it's a 2-shot penalty. It's a really interesting example. You might find it on YouTube if you decide to go there as well. Tom Kim is a professional golfer. And at the 2024 Genesis Invitational, he was late to the first tee. And if you do go on YouTube, you'll see a Tom Kim sprinting across the putting green, trying to get the first tee for his allocated tee time. And he just made it, I think, with seconds to go. Otherwise, he was going to start that round with a penalty. And that's the last thing you want. But just imagine, though, having said that, what sort of state do you think Tom Kim must have been in as he pulls driver with literally seconds to go before he hits his tee shot? Do you think he's going to be well prepared? Probably not. Do you think his mind's going to be racing? Yeah. Is it going to be thinking about the tee shot he's about to hit? Possibly. But he also might be allowing his brain to think about, how the hell have I got myself into this situation? So yeah, being timely in golf is pretty fundamental. And also I found with Alan, I need to be timely with the advising information that I gave him. So, when he hits an iron shot onto the green, he wants to walk up to the green with his putter in his hand. Give that to him in advance as he's walking up the fairway. If the ball has got some mud on it as it's landed on the green, then I've got to be ready with a towel to clean the ball for him. If he's asking me to come in and help him read a putt, then obviously I've got to get in there and be available to get there, read the putt so we can get over it in a certain amount of time. So, you've got to be on the clock at all times as a golf caddy. And again, if I link being on time or being timely into sales, we have to recognize, of course, that we are beholding to the buyer's timescale and not ours. You try forcing a buyer to part with their cash before they want to, and that experiment also won't work. So, obviously you've got to be mindful of the fact that there is a timescale, and typically it's the buyers. But actually being timely can also be more about being in their thoughts when they decide they want to reach out and have a conversation with someone that effectively solves the problem that they've got or can help people achieve the objectives they're trying to achieve. And so you can be timely, you can be in their thoughts as a consequence of providing them with regular information. Now, one would say the simplest way of doing that, for those of you that are on LinkedIn, is to have a very predictable and consistent posting strategy on LinkedIn. So every few days you're putting something out there specifically for your ideal client, which is of value and of use. Essentially, if you're doing that on a reasonably frequent basis and your ideal client is on there too, ideally they're going to see it, and therefore they're going to think of you the next time they want to effectively find something like whatever it is that you sell. And so you can be timely by having a consistent approach to how you show up, but you don't have to just do it on LinkedIn, of course. Keeping in contact with clients is essential. Once you've sold them once, I'd like to think you've got a chance of doing it again. And then guess what, guys? The second time around is slightly easier because the know, like, and trust thing exists. But those that you come into contact with that for whatever reason decided not to buy are still important people because they're still your ideal client. And so, keeping in contact with those, providing them with helpful information, just reaching out and finding out how things are going in their world, all that kind of great stuff is going to keep you front of mind. And again, if I go back to Stephen Covey, if you think about his book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, within that book, you'll find something called the emotional bank account. And very, very briefly, if you use the example that every time you meet somebody for the first time, they open up a bank account for you and you open up a bank account for them, a psychological one. And the more that you invest in that person, the more that you're putting credits, if you like, into that relationship. And you're building up this bank, if you like, of emotional collateral. The more that you pay into the emotional bank account, the more you're in credit. And what that really means is, on that time when you do need to make a withdrawal, as you would from a normal bank account, as long as you've got funds in your bank account, you can pull money out. And it's the same with the emotional bank account. As long as you've invested in that person, that relationship has been, supported with some kind of interaction over a consistent period of time, then you get the right to ask for something. Feedback, a call, a meeting, who knows, could be even more than that, could be a sale. But of course, if you don't invest in that relationship, don't be surprised when you do go and ask that you don't get the answer that you're looking for. As my good boss from a long time ago used to teach me, Matt, one day older, one day colder. And it's a great rule to think about when we talk about investing in and keeping relationships moving forward. So tip number 4, or valuable lesson I learned from caddying for Al, number 4 is the importance of self-awareness. And being self-aware is all about having a really clear understanding of the fact that the way that you think about stuff is going to have a huge impact on what you do. Okay? This is not a psychology podcast, but it's pretty basic fundamental psychology that, we all have a thought about something, and that thought then directs our ability to go and take action. And so being self-aware is being aware of how you think and the impact that has on what you do, and then the impact that what you do has on the wider world, if you like, and the people around you. And so if I'm behaving in a certain way, that's one thing, but if I'm behaving in a certain way, what impact is that having on the room or the pub I'm in, or the meeting that I'm in? And so being self-aware, of course, is a critical skill when it comes to selling, which I'll come on to. But if I think about the golf course, there's one real example I'll give you. So Alan is teamed up on that Monday in the qualification round with a Spanish guy and a Swiss guy. So he's out in a 3-ball. And we're on the 7th green. Al's level par, he's playing well, and he's actually getting better. I can see, I've known him a long time, and I know when he's in the zone, and he's in the zone. And he's standing over a 12-foot putt. And the Swiss guy is about 15 yards away from him. He's also got a putt to go next. And Al's over this 12-foot putt, and as he takes the putter back, the Swiss guy sniffs. Right at that point when Al's about to push his club through the ball. And unfortunately, Alan missed the putt. Now, I don't think that Swiss guy's a cheat. I just don't think he had any self-awareness around the impact that his sniff had on where he was and where he found himself, which was on the 7th green in the qualification round for the British Seniors Open. And that the impact that that had on Alan's ability to do his job properly. Now, I didn't say anything to Alan at the time. I didn't need to, because it just didn't make sense to have that conversation during a round of golf where Al's focus was on the next shot. But at the end of the round, when we were sitting in the clubhouse having a beer, I said, do you remember on 7 when you're about to hit that putt? And our Swiss friend sniffed. And he said, yeah, I do. I said, did that put you off? And he went, yeah, it did. I said, well, you did really well not to do anything. He said, yeah, I wanted to punch him in the face. He said, but I assessed my options, and I thought that if I did do that, that probably wouldn't bode well for the rest of the round. So I just decided to park it and move on. And so that in itself, I think, shows a great example of someone who is self-aware. The ability to respond to a situation rather than to react to one. When we think about sales and the importance of understanding the impact that we have through the actions that we take, for me, that's creating a greater understanding and awareness and a control over your self-awareness. And a really difficult habit to get into, and it's a very difficult skill to teach. Ask anybody, well, how do you get better at self-awareness? If I'm honest with you, it's a very difficult thing to solve. You either have it or you don't. But if you haven't got it and you aren't very good at it, then someone hopefully will point it out to you. But some of the things I would expect to see from people who are self-aware in a sales environment is they'll be very good at listening. And not just listening, they'll be able to feed back what they've heard to the person that said it to them. So hear what you said just then. Let me just give you a sort of feedback on what I think that means. And then they'll explain what they've heard and then how they've interpreted it. And that really is a good example, I think, of somebody who's listening to the other person, really leaning into what they're saying, and then being able to recite that information back. Another good example of someone who's got good self-awareness is someone that summarizes well. At the end of a sales conversation, before you wrap up and get the next call in the diary, always good practice to summarize. If I summarize self-awareness, it's the ability to respond to situations rather than to react. So if I summarize that little section and think about an example of Alan on that green, he must have gone through some kind of role play in his head about punching the Swiss guy and not punching the Swiss guy and just parking it and moving on in a sort of a split second, and then deciding that actually parking it and moving on was the best option for him. Number 5, know your golfer. I know quite a lot about Al and how he behaves on a golf course. He's very methodical. He has a sharp sense of humour, but he's very mindful and respectful towards his competitors. But he's a winner. And he's very habitual, and he's earned the right to be able to put himself in the qualification round for the Seniors Open because he's a scratch golfer. And you don't become a scratch golfer overnight. It takes hours and hours and hours, years of hard work. Millions of golf balls have been hit to allow you to be a scratch golfer. And that comes as a combination of a number of things, but process and habit, understanding what works well, and doing it on a consistent basis. And so if I think about specifically Al, when we talk about getting ready to play a round of golf, he'll go through about a 45-minute warm-up process involving going on at the driving range. He'll hit the same clubs. He'll just go through his wedges. He'll probably hit 60, 58, 54, and he'll probably only hit about 20 shots. And he may or may not hit 1 or 2 long irons, but most of his warm-up is down to his pitch play. He'll then go to the putting green and he'll go through 2 specific drills, one on distance and then one on tempo. And he'll do that every single time. And he did it every day for those 4 days, the 3 days he practiced and the 4th day on the day itself, because he wanted to create that habitual repetition of repeating success. And so knowing your golfer, I knew exactly what he was going to do. I didn't need to interrupt him. There is absolutely no value whatsoever in me saying, I'm not sure about that second putting drill, Al. Why don't you try the one that I've got? Pointless. So my role really, because I know him, is to stand well back, a bit like that first point, be out of the spotlight, and just allow him to get on with it, because I know that if he gets on with it, it works for him, that's better for us both. And so knowing your golfer, direct link with sales, mentioned it already on the podcast, ICP, Ideal Customer Profile. It's fundamental sales 101, the basics, right at the very beginning of any engagement with any client I work with is, who do you want to work with? What do they look like? What are the sorts of challenges or problems that they have, so that you can start to build out your marketing collateral to try and attract them. And then obviously when you go into lead generation mode, how do I go and find more people like that avatar, like that ICP? And so it's pretty obvious to make the link between knowing your golfer and knowing your potential client. But it's a little bit more than just knowing who your ICP is. There are a few other things that you can work out. What is their buyer's role? There are a number of different roles that buyers have. One's going to be in charge of cash. They're going to have slightly different needs to the one that's in charge of the technical delivery. So if you're, selling SaaS, there's going to be a technical buyer involved in evaluating how your SaaS product works and what are the features and the technical requirements needed in order to successfully deploy that SaaS into that person's business. If it is SaaS, let's stay on that theme, then someone's going to use that tech. And so there'll be a buyer who effectively is the sort of the user buyer. And so you can start to see there's more than just one person involved in this discussion, and knowing who they are, obviously go and find them on LinkedIn, but knowing the fact that they exist, and they'll exist in every sale, by the way, folks. There won't just be one person, there'll be a number of them, and they'll all have slightly different requirements. In fact, they might all have a slightly different opinion about the solution that they think they need or that they're looking for. And so you've got to be able to know that and counter it and support them and help them. Each of those people will have a slightly different personality type, perhaps. Some might be slightly introverted, some might be slightly extroverted, some might want to make decisions based on data and metrics and tangible evidence. And you've got to provide them with that information. Some of them are going to need time. You've got to give them that space. Others want to make quick decisions that go with gut feel. Others want to have a real social interaction. They want to see case studies, and all of that stuff needs to be chucked into the sausage machine and basically stirred for you to really know who your ideal client is. And actually, if you haven't ever gone through that exercise, then I would draw your attention to a really fantastic author that I know. I love this guy's work. Brilliant book called Converted, How to Help More People Buy What You Sell. That's one of my books. Sorry about that. That's rubbish. But if you want to grab a copy of that book, there's a whole chapter on knowing who your customer is and the ICP exercises in there. So in the show notes, you'll find a link to Convert. Go and fill your boots. So yeah, a whole bunch of stuff that I found in terms of knowing who my golfer was that I thought, you know what, that is so relevant to the world of sales. So yeah, learning point value, call it what you want. Number 5 is know your golfer. Number 6 was a really interesting one, but one I kind of knew anyway, which is number 6 is knowing when to shut up. So, if you've sort of worked out by now, those of you not familiar with golf, the caddie's got quite an important job. More than just carrying a bag, you've got to be a bit of a kind of a, well, the phrase I'd like to use, you've got to be a kind of a coach. You're a support network for the golfer. You're there to prop them up, make them feel good, pick them up when things aren't going well, motivate them, calm them down when they're getting too excited, and give them help and advice. And I would summarize all of that as being a bit of a coach. But there's a right time and a wrong time to speak, and that's why number 6 is know when to shut up. Ask any great caddy, any professional caddy, if you get the chance, and they'll probably tell you, look, I only speak when I'm spoken to. It's not like I can't add value, but I just don't need to, because I sort of take my cue from my pro golfer that if he's okay or she's okay, she doesn't need my help. It's when she's not or he's not that he's going to ask for a second opinion. And so a great example in the world of golf is getting called in to read a putt. And normally when Al calls me in to read a putt, it's because he's not quite sure and just wants that second opinion. Matt, I see it coming from the left. What do you think? So yeah, Al, I see it from the left, probably 2 holes left or just inside left edge, whatever it might be. But I don't need to be talking to him all of the time, right? I don't need to be in his ear on every shot. Pointless. In fact, unhelpful, unproductive, takes him out of the zone he's in. And by the way, I remind you, I'm a 14.9 handicapper and he's off scratch. Who's going to know best? Now, I would say, as a golfer and having been in that environment, of course, what you're going to do on a regular basis is give your guy or girl the yardage. So I'm in charge of the yardage book. I need to know exactly what the yardage is to the front of the green and the back of the green and the pin to allow Alan to pull the club that he thinks is the right club. And on the rare occasions, if he pulls a club that I think is the wrong club, and we'll come onto this shortly, then my role is not to challenge him. It's just simply to ask him why he thinks that's the right shot. Because what I'm looking for there's a reason why he's gone for a 7-iron rather than a 6, for argument's sake. I want him to confirm to me, to sell me on the 7-iron. And by doing that, he's confirming to himself it's the right club. Great example would be probably the most famous shot in golf. If you are a golfer and you're listening to this, you'll know about this particular shot from Seve Ballesteros. Goes right back to 1993 in the European Masters in Switzerland. His caddy was the legendary Billy Foster. He's now on Matt Fitzpatrick's bag. But in principle, here's what happened. Seve's managed to get himself in contention on the final round on Sunday, and he's standing on the 18th tee box. Just to let you know, he'd birdied the last 5 holes to put himself there, so he's on a run of all runs. He pulls driver. He sticks his driver way right, off the fairway, into the woods, like really into the mess. And when Seve and Billy Foster get to the ball, they realise that the ball is, to some extent, you can get a club on it, but in front of them, about 6 foot away, is this 7-foot wall. And behind the wall are these massive big conifer trees. And behind the trees, of course, is 200 yards to the green. There's no shot. And Billy Foster says to Seve, look, just take a wedge, just chip it out sideways, get on the fairway, Seve, and let's get up there. And if we make par, we can probably get in the playoffs. Seve goes, oh, no, I see the shot, Billy, I see the shot. And so he pulls Billy in, and Billy does try 2 or 3 times to try and convince him otherwise. But ultimately, Seve says, look up there. And Foster says, he asked me to look up. He said, over this wall and through these conifer trees was a gap in the trees the size of a dinner plate. And he said, I can hit that shot, give me a 7-iron. And Billy goes, look, you just chip it out. They said, no. Why you say these things to me? Why you put these negative thoughts in my head? Give me 7-iron. Anyway, cut a long story short, Seve hits a 7-iron through the gap, the size of a dinner plate. It goes 180 yards and it lands just short of the green. Seve chips that in for birdie, by the way. But the point is, Seve knew the shot, and his message to Billy was, why do you put those negative thoughts in my head? And it's all about knowing when to shut up and when to speak. And in sales, it's exactly the same. It's knowing when to be quiet and when to offer advice. And there's way too many cliches for me to obviously waste time duplicating that on this. Telling isn't selling. 2 ears, 1 mouth. If you're talking, you're losing. All of that stuff, totally agree with, and all makes sense. You've heard it 1,000 times. And so all I would really ask you to do when it comes to value number 6, which is knowing when to shut up, is just be mindful of just how much talking you do in a sales conversation with somebody else called a prospect or a customer. You know, the golden rule of thumb I always try and work to is 30-70. If I'm talking 30% of the time, that means they've got to talk for 70% of the time. Would I want them talking more than me? Of course I would. Why? Because they've got all of the answers. And so one of the things I used to do back in the day when I worked in sales, in corporate employment for somebody else, was I used to put a little line on the piece of paper on my notebook. Every time I asked a question, I'd put a little line. And I'd worked out that if I got more than 10 lines, it meant I'd asked more than 10 questions. And more than 10 questions took me beyond the 30% time limit. And so the name of the game was, can I ask really great questions, but less than 10? Now, of course, we don't need to put a little line on a book because we've got AI, and most of you will probably be using AI anyway. I have one particular client, they use a piece of software. They send me transcripts of calls so I can evaluate how he has been on the call with a prospect and give some advice on where it went well and perhaps what he could have done better. And you asked that question then, why was that? Why didn't you try asking this question next time? And all those kind of things that sometimes you miss when you're in the heat of the moment, that someone like me, who's evaluating the call afterwards, gets the ability to do. But what this AI does is it serves up a bunch of metrics. So when I get the file and I look, the first thing I look at is talk time. And it shows me what percentage of 100 he was talking and what percentage of 100 they were talking. And so maybe it's time for you to start to ask yourself the question, do I need some kind of measurement metric to allow myself to understand when is the right time to speak? More importantly, when do I need to shut up? Okay, number 7. The 7 piece of valuable information I learned while I was caddying was you got to be one step ahead. So as a caddy, hopefully you've worked out by now, there is so much to being a golf caddy, and you do have to be one step ahead. And by being one step ahead, you have the ability to make everybody's life, not just your golfers, but yourselves, that much easier. If you think about it in a golf world, if you ever watch golf on TV or you've played it, you've only really got a few moments to get the right yardage, assess the conditions, pick the right club, and then play your shot. You are actually on the clock. And in a professional tournament like we were in, we did get warned by the referee that we were losing play. We were losing pace on the group in front, and that if we didn't speed up, he would put us on the clock. That's a technical term in golf, which means you are then close to being penalised. And so you've only got this few moments to do all of this information. So it only makes sense to help yourself out by taking some of that pressure off, by being one step ahead. And the way that I did it was, because we went up 3 or 4 days earlier and we'd played the course 3 times before the Monday round, I'd made a note of every single shot that Alan had hit, every club he'd taken, and the direction of the wind on those 3 days. And that evidence, that information, that due diligence, if you like, gave me the ability to assess in advance the shot that was about to be played. So while Al's on the green putting out, I'm already thinking about the next tee shot. I'm already looking at the yardage book, thinking, what do we play Thursday, Friday, Saturday? What's the wind doing today? We played 3 wood yesterday, winds in the same direction. It's 3 wood today. So when I get to the tee box, a lot of that calculation has already taken place. I'm handing in 3 and I'm confirming the reason why. And I use the swan example. You'll have heard it many times, of course, but it is a bit like being the swan. You know, on the exterior, I've got this fantastic demeanor of being in control and calm and confident and certain. And you need all of those characteristics to create confidence and calm and certainty in your golfer. But by contrast, underneath the water, my little legs were going like mad. But being one step ahead allows you to be prepared. And in contrast, not being prepared can create a challenge, because I can remember on the 18th tee, just to put a little bit of context around this point. So Al played brilliantly. It's a par 71 at Montefiore. He shot 73. He's standing on the 18th tee at 72, so he's 1 over. We didn't think 1 over was going to be enough to qualify. We felt it'd be 2 or 3 under. Subsequently, it was. But he didn't know that at the time because he didn't know what the other scores were. And so he decided to pull driver on 18. Now, 18's a par 5. It makes a lot of sense to play driver. But the previous 2 days, we'd played 3-wood because there's a bunker at 275 yards on that fairway, and driver brings that into play. You can reach that bunker with that driver. In Alan's head, he's thinking, I've got nothing to lose. I'm only here once. Who knows? I might be able to birdie this hole, get it back to level par and win with a chance. And if I connect, he's capable of hitting a driver 300 yards and further, given that the fairways were quite hard. He's pulled the right club. The only problem with that, whether it was adrenaline or he didn't quite connect, it was the only bad shot he'd played in the whole round, and he pulled it left into some trees. And cut a long story very, very short, we both then descended into chaos because we hadn't prepared for him to be in the rough, in that moment, trying to make birdie on a par 5. And we ended up making bogey. Hence the challenge and the problem that we'd brought upon ourselves because we weren't one step ahead. We hadn't prepared in advance. And so in sales, being one step ahead is critically essential, because if you're not, it means you don't know where you're going, and everybody needs to know where they're going in sales. If you're not one step ahead, it means you haven't planned in advance. If you're not one step ahead, it means chaos could be around the corner, as it was for us on the 18th. And it kind of suggests that you're winging it. And so how do you become one step ahead? Well, you have some kind of framework that you use. And if we isolate this, and I've done it many times on the podcast before, into a sales conversation with somebody, there's a framework that you would ideally adopt that allows you to help this person diagnose their problem, confirm it, ensure that they've got all of the relevant resources that they need in order to move forward. Let's use BANT as an example. I know BANT is pants and it gets a lot of bad press, and it should do if it's delivered in the way that people present it on LinkedIn as a tick box exercise. Got to be honest with you guys, I use BANT all the time. I never use a tick box exercise when I deliver it, but I do actually want to find out if they have got budget and they do have the authority to buy. So anyway, the component pieces are fundamental and rooted in sales. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise, but of course, be sympathetic and classy with the way that you deliver those component pieces. But let's just call that a framework. So you'll go through that kind of process, if you like, to ensure that they get the best experience, that they diagnose their problem, that you make sure that they're the right fit, and that you can help them with your solution and present that to them in some way, shape or form before agreeing what you're both going to do next. And we'll summarize that in a bunch of steps. One of the key things I teach my clients is a 6-step process. And you probably have your own process, or if you haven't, go and find one or reach out to me, or you'll find that process in that book, Converted. So whichever way it is, you do need to be one step ahead if you are going to help your prospect get the most out of the conversation. Because if you don't, you're winging it and the conversation could go everywhere. And so it allows you to better serve that key point number 1, the prospect better. And ultimately, if you're serving them better and you're giving them the opportunity to follow some kind of coherent direction, one would assume that the benefit of that to them is they get the opportunity to make far better buying decisions. And, if that's with you, who doesn't want that? Okay, folks, let's wrap this up with the last thing that I learned from caddying for Al. Value, skill, tip, call it what you want. Number 8 is you got to be able to mitigate risk. I think I've already explained to you once before, golf is the hardest game on the planet as far as I'm concerned. You've got this small ball, it's not moving, you're the only one involved. Unlike tennis, cricket, football, you've got a moving ball and you've got a bunch of other people. You haven't got that in golf. It should be easier, right? You've got this club, all you've got to do is whack this ball with your club and it moves forward. It should be really simple, but it's not. And those of you that listen to this that play golf will be probably chuckling to yourself when I say this. It is one day the easiest game on the planet, and then you turn up next week and you can't hit a barn door with a banjo. If you factor into that as well the fact that there is external factors such as the weather, right? Nothing worse than finding yourself on a golf course in the rain. If you factor into that as well, bunkers. You try hitting a ball out of a bunker. It's a totally different experience to hitting the ball off the fairway. Think about the rough. My favourite golf course in the UK is Walton Heath down in Surrey. I get to play it once a year. And the rough there is brutal, but it's only 3 or 4 inches high. But it is thick heather. And if you've played that course, you'll know what I mean. If your ball goes in that heather, it's minimum one shot lost. You've got to try and hack it out on the fairway left and then start to play the game again. Some courses that you play will have water on. Yours might if you play. I played a few courses that's got water on it. It's a challenge, right? Every course is going to have some form of out of bounds. I think about Monteith and the first tee shot there that Alan played on that open qualification round on that Monday morning. Right the way down the right-hand side is a train track, literally 15 yards to the right for the whole of the length of the 450-yard fairway. Got trains going past. And all of these things, let's call them hazards, make an already difficult game that much harder. However, what I would say to you is these are all known hazards. They are all within the golfer's control. We know where the bunker is. We know where the out of bounds is. We know where the rough is. We can see it. There is no risk if we don't put the ball anywhere near those hazards. And because they're known, we shouldn't. Oh, dear. And the caddie's there. My role is to identify the risk and to mitigate those risks so that Alan doesn't go anywhere near them. And if we think about that point we made just recently about the 18th and how he found the trouble on the left by taking driver, the previous 2 rounds, we'd hit 3-wood. Why? Because Al's 3-wood goes 265 yards and the bunker's at 275. He can't reach the bunker. We take the bunker out of play. And it's that ability to research in advance, to methodically think through. It's that ability that allows you to mitigate the risk. And in sales is all about mitigating risk for both buyer and seller. We're all about, as salespeople, mitigating the risk of getting a no. The buyer is all about mitigating the risks of making the wrong decisions. There's a fabulous book out there, you may have read it, called The Jolt Effect. And if you read that book, you'll find in there an absolute gold nugget, which talks more about the problem that we used to always talk about in sales, which is the fear of missing out. And it talks about the fear of messing up. So it's no longer FOMO, it's FOMO. And it's really good when you think about it, because every buyer is fearful of making the wrong decision. Most buyers that I've ever met are happy to accept that price is never the primary driver. What's more important to them is keeping their job. And the best way of keeping your job is by not buying a cheap thing that doesn't work or doesn't arrive on time. So, buyers, we sometimes forget this, don't we? It's a really important point. Buyers care about themselves and their own ability to earn a salary each month and make sure their mortgage is paid and they can take their family on a nice holiday each year and enjoy the trappings that come with being a successful buyer. They care about that way more than looking after the interests of their organisation. Of course, it comes as a close second, but it's second. What's important to them is keeping their job. And that's why FOMO is so important. And so mitigating risk is a fundamental part of being in sales. And so all I would ask as we sort of draw this podcast to a conclusion is, well, what are you doing to mitigate the risks? Are you going to go back and create that pre-call plan if you haven't already done? Do you want to go and download mine? Just DM me on LinkedIn. Do you have a process that you take a conversation with a buyer through that allows you to avoid some of the risks that are known? Let's be honest about it. You know every objection there's going to be because you've heard them all. You know all the questions your prospect's going to ask you at the start of the conversation because you've already been asked them. That there aren't really any sales risks out there that you're not aware of, that aren't known, that you couldn't plan for. So my advice is go and plan for them. So there you go. I don't know if that's convinced you to take up the game of golf or not. Probably not. And maybe it has changed your mind. Maybe you do decide to go and have a game of golf. If you haven't ever played golf, here's an idea for you. There'll be a driving range real close to you. And actually these days, those driving ranges are quite a nice place to be. There's normally a bar or a cafe. You've got all sorts of a TrackMan, the ability to measure. You can play competitions on video screens. You can generally have a laugh. And I've found whenever I go to a driving range these days, they're full of what I call non-golfers as well as golfers, just normal people out for an afternoon to enjoy themselves. So I don't know. Maybe I've convinced you to go and take up golf if you haven't. If you have already and you found some value in the story that I was telling there about Al and some of those examples from golf, I hope you got loads out of it from a sales perspective as well. If you're not into golf at all and you don't want to go at the driving range, but you do have an association with helping more people buy what you sell, then hopefully those 8 values are going to come into play. The first one, the primary role is to serve others. Be number 2. Put your customer, make your customer the star of the show. You don't need to be. You can be the second. You can be the extra. Number 2, you've got to be prepared. It's an obvious one. But I can tell you for a fact, on the days I'm not good is on the days I don't prepare in advance. Number 3 was be timely. Yeah. Doesn't necessarily mean you've got to show up to a call on time, because that's table stakes. But being timely means that you show up on a frequent enough basis in your prospect or your customer's world so that they think, do you know what? I keep seeing Matt appearing on LinkedIn, seems to talk a good game. I've listened to him on his podcast. Actually, we could do some sales training or some coaching. I'm going to reach out to him. And so being timely also allows you the opportunity to get to the front of the queue. Number 4 was be self-aware. Don't be that Swiss sniffer, folks. Just be mindful of the impact that you have and the actions that you take on other people. Because believe it or not, even though you are the most important person in your life, there are going to be other people. And in the world of sales, of course, that's critical, because your actions and the way that you handle yourself and manage yourself in a sales environment is going to actually have quite a big say in the outcome of how those conversations play out. Number 5 was know your golfer. Obviously, I was lucky. I'd known Alan 15 years, knew his game inside out, knew when to leave him alone. I also knew how he got the best out of himself. I didn't need to get involved with that. And that only comes from investing time and spending time with him. We talked about the emotional bank account. But in sales, of course, knowing who your potential client is crucial in sort of lead generation and marketing time, because you can go out to the market and you can talk directly to them if you know who they are. Number 6, know when to shut up. As we bring this podcast to an end, I'm beginning to know when I'm going to shut up. But yeah, knowing when to shut up, or actually, another way of looking at that is knowing when to speak. But as far as sales is concerned, we kind of want to make sure that certainly in the early exchanges, we're always allowing our customer the space and time to do the talking, and most of the talking should be done by them. Number 7 was be one step ahead. Have some kind of framework that you use that allows you to know where you're going next, so that you're not rudderless, you're not winging it, you're not at the whim, if you like, or the direction of travel being presented by the other person. That's not to say that they don't have a say in that. Of course they do. However, you're the salesperson. You're the one with the solution. You're the one that does this for a living. You should be the one that really guides the conversation in the right direction, so that they get the best chance of making the right decision for them, which hopefully is with you. And then the final one was about mitigating risk. Sales is a risky business, folks. Okay, folks, that's the end of the podcast. Thank you so much indeed for being a listener. Without you, we wouldn't have a podcast. So I'm really, really grateful for the fact that you keep showing up and listening to what we're serving up here. All I would ask is just one favour. If you found some value and you think you know someone in your network that you think might also be interested to hear this, get some of those knowledge bombs that we've dropped, just share it with them. I'd be really, really grateful. That's the only ask that I've got. Look forward to talking to you again on the next episode of the Sales Caddies podcast. Whatever you're doing, go and knock your lights out. See you soon.